I used to think the smart move was to leave, to chase whatever was happening somewhere else. But the longer I've been here, the further that's been from the truth. Some of the most ambitious work in the world is happening here, by people who chose to build here on purpose. And the world is just starting to notice. This is the long game. And we're not stopping now.
All right. Welcome to Homecoming, Andrew.
Great to be here, and thank you for doing this. This is a really important week.
I think it's going to be super fun. Everyone calls you Mac, is that right?
Yeah, Mac is good.
I can call you Mac?
Of course, you can call me Mac.
Hesitated.
My 5-year-old calls me Mac, so
no way.
You can call me Mac.
Tell me if I have this right. You joined Uber 14 years ago to get things rolling, then went on to run all of mobility and delivery globally, and then you crushed that so much that Dara put you on a one-way flight to New York and made you President COO last year.
It's a short version. It's probably overly flattering, but yeah, that's roughly the story. Yeah.
Incredible. So take us back to day one of Uber here. What's been Canada's impact on Uber? Not Uber, on all of Uber.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, probably not well understood, and I think more important than people realize. I mean, even going back to Uber's founding story, right? So Uber was co-founded by a Canadian, Garrett Camp, who's probably one of the most successful Canadian entrepreneurs of all time, but not necessarily a household name.
Out west, right?
Yeah, out of Calgary. And Garrett and Travis had the idea for Uber at Le Web conference in Paris when they're having a late night jam, a famous Travis late night jam. And
I've seen the TV show.
Garrett was a co-founder, stayed on our board, held significant equity in the company through IPO. And that was sort of the first moment, but not the only moment, where Canada had an outsized impact on Uber. Garrett brought over some engineering talent from Calgary, so some of the early engineers that built the original Uber app were Canadians. Wow. Toronto was Uber's second international market, 7th city overall. But I think really a lot of firsts came from Uber in Canada. Really the place where we debuted the low-cost product. Folks may recall, Uber launched as a limousine app. It was a luxury service. Mm-hmm. It was, we were proud of the fact that we were 40% more expensive than taxis. Everyone's private driver was the original mission, right? But Toronto actually was one of the first markets to scale low-cost products on Uber, so that was a big moment. Toronto was the first sort of international market to really battle for ride-sharing regulations, right? The U.S. embraced ride-sharing, I would say, earlier. It wasn't clean, it was still messy, but Toronto was one of the first sort of international battlegrounds for both the political and legal discussions that needed to happen. And our Canadian team, I think, did a lot of great work to make sure that ride-sharing was ultimately legalized in Toronto, and now it's gone global. And I think probably most impactful, though, is Uber Eats was really built in Toronto. And when I say built, Uber Eats as you know it, a marketplace where you can get every restaurant in the city, to your house within 30 minutes, that concept originated here. We were experimenting with some models of trying to get you, sandwiches from a cooler in 8 minutes in a few different cities, but we piloted the marketplace model here. And what's become known internally as the Green app, the Uber Eats app, was built here. It was the first market we got to profitability. And obviously that's a lasting legacy. That's now a $110 billion GMV business, basically half the company.
Right.
And the Toronto team really did the job driving that.
So we claim Uber.
You claim Uber
We
Eats,
claim
yes.
Uber.
Yes.
Yeah, at least half of it.
Something like that, yeah.
I mean, that's incredible. I spend a disgusting amount of money on Uber Eats, and so thank you, I think.
I'm grateful for that.
It's rare for people to stay on a path for 14 years. We're here talking about the long game, like building from that journey you're talking about 14 years to today. I spent 10 years at Shopify, and I feel like we're a dying breed, double digits in a single organization through that level of scale. If we pulled up, whether it's the stock chart, the employee chart, the volume charts, like over that time, that's absurd. Like, were there what were the pivotal moments in that journey? What kept you on that drive for that long?
I mean, it's a great question because I certainly didn't set out with a plan to be at the same company for more than a decade. I mean, my father was 32 years with General Motors, and I sort of looked at that and was proud of that, but it was also like, that's not going to be me, and also that's not how modern, careers work.
Right.
People hop around every few years. I think what I didn't realize is that when you get into something, and I think particularly when you get into something early, and you feel passionate about actually the mission, and you love the product, and you use the product every day, and you enjoy the people you work with, and the learning curve is really steep but rewarding, why would you leave? And so for me, I've always used the filter of, if those three things are true, if I'm learning, if I like the people I work with, and I feel really passionate about the product and the mission, then I'm going to stick around. And I've managed to hang on. And I use the term hang on deliberately because working at Uber can be a grind. And building a company early on is a grind. And particularly at Uber, political and legal battles, insane funding. I think Uber in a lot of ways was sort of the face of the ZERP era of infinite fundraising. And we were proud of being that face, but our competitors also played the same game. And I think that sort of camaraderie that you build from being in the trenches in those hard moments actually keeps you around, right? And so I've had this unique phenomenon where whenever things are great, I'm like, well, why would I ever leave? This is awesome. And when things are really tough, I'm like, I'm not going to leave my colleagues at this moment because I feel a responsibility to stay and help build through that. So, less than like key moments that have kept me around, it's that sort of feeling overall.
Yeah. I love that. And you talked about the ZERP era. I used to be able to get across Toronto for $3.50. And I think like AI tokens now are the version of Uber rides back then.
I have heard that. I saw an analogy on Twitter yesterday that said like we're in the Uber pool phase of AI where everything is subsidized. There's unlimited CapEx flowing into the market. And users of the tools are the beneficiaries.
There's at least a dozen people here with their laptop just slightly ajar, just trying to clock in their cloud capacity. The other impressive thing that I honestly didn't realize until very recently, I'm almost embarrassed about it, is like the number of founders in our market that came out of those years in that team. Like I know of Dan Park from Clutch, Raquel Erdison from Wabi, Rob from Float. That's absurd as is, and I think I'm missing people. Who am I missing here?
Yeah, I mean, Bowie from Pepper, The Peak, Brett Chang, built and sold The Peak and bought it back. And I think there's other folks like Sheldon McCormick, who was a co-founder at Properly, and Properly ultimately didn't work, but they built an incredible team and had an incredible concept and product, and the timing was just sort of off, right? So I think there's probably dozens of names. They're either quietly founders or are like early employees at companies that I can think of, and it's really special. And I think it's something the whole Uber team is proud of.
Like a thing, we talk a lot about starting companies. I'm obviously a big believer in that mission and purpose, but the other big opportunity set is like if you're not in a position or interested in starting a company, joining and helping a company scale from 1 billion to 10 or 100 or any is like an equally challenging journey. And there are a lot of refounding moments through that time. And you talk about whether it's people that came together to start Uber Eats that became this thing, or through many chapters of Shopify, people that were founders of different moments in that company. I think that can be like as rewarding and obviously as impactful on the market when you then look at, again, the alumni coming out of it, the stories coming out of it, and maybe they just don't get the same credit.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there are elements, so I mostly agree with that, for sure. I mean, I think the beneficiary of joining as an early employee versus having to go 0 to 1 yourself is like often product market fit is already there or like at least emerging.
Yeah.
So some of the folks who are early at Uber, we get a lot of credit for like building the company, but I'm not sure it would have mattered if it was me or somebody else because the product market fit of Uber from day one was so strong. But what you do get is scale. As you say, like I remember first Friday night in Toronto, we had 6 cars on the road, right? Yeah. And the problems and how you operate when you have 6 cars on the road, And then 14 years later, we have 10.5 million people who earn money on the platform monthly on Uber. You know, that's a scaling, a set of scaling lessons over the last 14 years that I couldn't have got anywhere else. And same for team. Before Uber, you know, biggest team I managed was 6 people. 3 of them were unpaid interns. 1 of them was my sister. And you know, now we have a company that's, call it 30,000 people, and learning how to like run systems and processes and an operating cadence that works at that scale. Yeah, you know, growing up with the company, you get all that benefit.
Now, do you think, like if you're a young person in the room, do you think it's a good idea to go get a job in big tech versus start a company? Like, how do people make that choice?
I think, so it's a great question, and I'm not sure the answer is the same for everyone, right? Like, I actually have to think, you have to think a little bit about like how you're wired, right? And I think the more sort of risk tolerant you are, the earlier you should go, right? And I think the benefit of going and working at big tech, like, and you know, big tech in Canada, like Shopify would be a great example of that, is I think you see what great looks like, right? Because the type of talent that Shopify is able to get across every domain shows you what great looks like. And I think there's a value to the apprenticeship that comes with that, right? If you're a designer and you're learning at Shopify, you're learning from the best. And then if you want to go do something earlier stage after that, you're set up with the toolkit. So I think there's value in big tech to see what great looks like. But I think you could go completely the other way and say, I'm going to go right out of school, or I'm going to drop out of school, or right out of high school with the tools that are available today, and I'm going to build a company from day one, and I'm going to learn by putting my hands into the thing. And I think that brings a lot of value too. But you have to be comfortable with discomfort, right? Like you're going to feel sick to your stomach every morning because you're not making money, and you're not sure if your product's working, and you're not sure if your company's going to survive. And I don't think that's for everybody.
You know, when I go to SF in New York, I feel like you can throw a stone and you hit a Canadian in tech. And like that network runs so many layers deep. We heard about it from Danko earlier, a bit from Toby. And it's starting to get a lot more visible what the influence and impact of Canadians in public tech companies, at frontier AI labs, across the gamut are. What do you think it is about the Canadian profile, the builder profile, that makes it disproportionately present in that leadership layer? Or is that just a lens that we have because we happen to be sitting here?
No, I think that's real. I think that's real. I was talking to Elliot last night at dinner, and you were talking about how you run into Canadians in high places in Silicon Valley or at large tech companies in the US, and you don't even know until you sort of both discover that you're Canadian. And,
it's like a handshake, or
you start to sort of piece it together, and you see how many of these folks are out there. And I don't know if there's one defining trait, but I think it's real. Like, I think there's disproportional representation. I think some of it is probably that people who ultimately do well as, building companies, and even people who do well within larger organizations, are sort of the quiet builders who don't necessarily seek personal credit, aren't playing internal games, aren't sort of out there for external aggrandizement, and are really just sort of trying to do good work in service of the mission of the company. And I think over the long run, and I think our thesis is the long game, that if you sort of quietly do good work and you use the filter of, is this decision the right decision for the company, that those people ascend in organizations over time. I think that's part of my story. No bullshit, no politics, no self-promotion. Just sort of quietly try to do good work, make good decisions, work very hard, and I think the score will sort itself out. And I think there's a lot of Canadians that are doing that within tech.
Do you think we need a bit of that, though? A little bit of stirring the pot, a little bit more vocal politicking? I feel like we have like a Skynet network of Canadians just ready to activate, but they're all undercover about it.
I think if the substance is there, then yes. So, and what I mean by that is, I think the worst type of person who is all vocal, all flash, all sizzle, no substance. I think where we have substance, where you've got a great product or a great team or a great business or a great company, or you as an individual are truly doing great work, then yes, I think we need a little bit more chest pounding.
Little bravado.
And I think there is a moment for that, and I do think that that moment is now. So yes, but I think the substance has got to be there first.
So if you're a Canadian working in the Valley, in New York, in any of these markets, wear the badge, open an office here, hire the people. I think we're seeing a lot of that starting now. There's like a wave now of AI companies starting to open Canadian offices, and there's also, as Danko mentioned, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think like every point of access, every point of opportunity for Canadian talent to stay here and have global impact, it's a valuable opportunity.
Totally
bring
agree.
it.
And you're going to mint more talent. I mean, I've
create the conditions that create more of this example of what the Uber Canada team
I mean, I've heard some sort of business prognosticators or tech commentators in Canada say, it's bad if Google opens an AI lab here. Sierra just announced they're opening a Toronto office.
Awesome.
I think that's amazing. And I've heard the notion floated that, well, this is going to soak up all the talent, which is going to make it harder for the startup ecosystem to get the people they need. But I think exactly the opposite. I think that it's going to mint the talent that will then seed the future generation of startups. And by the way, I hope it also mints the capital, right? Like we need a bunch of people in Canada to get wealthy or semi-wealthy from tech exits so that they can fund the next wave of startups, or they can do their second act or their third act. And like the ecosystem just needs to be bigger, the talent needs to be denser, and there needs to be more capital, and it needs to stay. And I think more is more and better in this case.
Absolutely. So brain drain has been, a hot button topic for a while. Is that still the right frame then? Does that matter?
I think it's a good question. I think in some senses, brain drain is understating the problem. I remember reading about brain drain like 20 years ago, and it tended, at least at the time, it was sort of about like doctors and certain professionals crossing the border because they could make more money, and that was a problem. I think we have a bigger problem today, which is that it's over the past decade, I would say, it's been not just brains that we're losing, specific skills. It's like the most highly contributing members of society are leaving. It's not just doctors. It's capital. It's entrepreneurs. It's trained senior executive talent. It's people who just want to build the Canadian dream, but take that to America. And I think that's a problem, right? I think when you have people leaving because they feel like we've lost the plot a little bit here, not just in the domain of tech, but in just like general common sense, how our society works, I think that's a problem. And so I think brain drain understates it. The good news is I do feel like momentum is starting to shift on that front, and I think folks like yourself and Toronto Tech Week play a role in that. And so I'm grateful for that.
Thank you.
But I think brain drain understates the problem that we've been having for the last decade.
I think something you said to me when we were talking about today was seeing the world through clear eyes is patriotic. I thought that was a really important observation on you obviously have a vested interest and value what happens in Canadian society, but that doesn't mean we look away from what's true or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is true for companies. I think it's true for countries. I do not think that being critical or being self-critical is being guilty of negativity, right? I think it's a positive thing to point out where we can be better. I think the only way to improve is to acknowledge where you have deficiencies. And again, that's true at the team level, that's true at the individual level, I think it's true at the societal level and as a country. And so I have seen a little bit of the narrative at times be like, people are so down on Canada, right? And I don't really think that's real. Now, if you're down on Canada, but not actively trying to be part of the solution, then I think, yeah, there's a point to be made there, right? Like ragging on something, but not doing anything about it. Again, those types of folks are not the people that I want to be around.
Yeah.
But I think the folks who say we need to be better in these 5 ways, and here's how I'm going to personally contribute, those folks are most valuable to the country.
Now, You did the drain. You moved to New York to take on this new role. How has that changed what you feel about this very topic? How has that changed your feelings about Canada?
So I'll say a couple things. One is, I was very sensitive. So I took a new role in June of last year, and we moved the family in September. And folks will recall early last year, at the beginning of 2025, we had a federal election. And I've been quite vocal in my opinion of the way I thought the country was being run at the time and some of the changes that needed to be made. And of course, the government didn't change. We did get a change in leader, which I think is great. And I was sort of very sensitive to leaving Canada at that moment because I had a number of people reach out to me and be like, "Oh, you're fed up, so you're leaving." And I'm like, "No, I'm leaving because it's important for me in this role to be at one of our headquarters, and I would rather stay, all else being equal." I made the choice to stay the last 13 years in a global. I was voting with my feet, being here in a global role and not moving. But that wasn't sort of an option on the last set. But it was no statement. There was no value judgment there that I'd had enough. It was time to go. It's the opposite. I want to be a part of the solution. What I'll say, being now in the U.S. and working in the U.S. First of all, there's no major epiphanies. It's not like you walk around Manhattan.
Didn't hand you a pamphlet that gave you a new set of
Yeah, it's
values?
not like, oh, now I see it. There's not that. What I would say though, and I think it's important for us to have clear eyes on this. Nobody is coming to help, right? And nobody thinks about us as much as we think about ourselves. We have this notion that the world is all looking at Canada and folks are like, "Oh, you're in the US, what do they think?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't think they think about us that much, right? Humans are wired in this way where we think that people are, we're very conscious of what everybody thinks of us, our successes, our failures, our virtues, our flaws. But people are so tied up in themselves, and I think this is true globally as well. America has all sorts of challenges and triumphs that they are wrestling with or that they are proud of. They're not thinking about Canada too much, and I think that's true globally. And so what does that mean? It means we need to do the right things here because it's virtuous for us to do the right things here, right? We need to fix the problems. We need to celebrate the achievements. We need to get a virtuous flywheel of our own going because it doesn't actually matter what the world thinks of us.
Yeah, being self-important is a trap in of itself. Thinking too much about everyone, we don't even think about you.
Yeah, and also defining yourself by what others think of you is not something to aspire to, right? I mean, there was a moment, our last prime minister said, a core part of being Canadian is that we define ourselves as not American. I think that's a horrible way to think about what we want to be as a country. We should aspire to be things. We should not aspire not to be like them.
So you mentioned our change at government. Yeah, amen. You mentioned our change in federal government, and we hear probably what I would say is them saying a lot of the right things about tech. Do you think they're getting some of those things right, or do you think they're still missing the point?
I think a lot of the direction of travel is vastly improved, right? And I hope and I think a lot of folks that are in positions like ours, with some influence and some point of view on where the country should go, feel that way. I think it's really important that we move quickly from announcements to progress, and I think it's really important that people like this room and Build Canada and all these groups trying to improve the country are holding the government to account, right? I think the accountability tracker that Build Canada has built is amazing, and if you haven't checked this out, you should look at it. Basically tracks every single thing the government said they're going to do, and then what the progress on that thing has been to a very granular level of detail, and I check it regularly. I think it's great.
Amazing.
So I think the announcements are generally pointed in the right direction. I think the mood music is good. I think some of the bills working their way through parliamentary process are good. I just want everything to go faster, right? It has been, we have had a new government for well over a year at this point. The government has had or now has a majority control, which means they're able to get their agenda done. There's a will of Canadians for change. I think there's broad support of the government, which means I think they should feel like they have a mandate for what they're saying they're going to do. And I think that the direction of travel is good. I think we just need to go much, much faster. I think major project office targeting 6-month approvals is admirable. I don't know why that can't be 6 weeks with the tools we have, right? I think there are a number of examples when governments have had their, had their feet to the fire, that processes that take years actually can take days. In the early days of the Ukraine-Russia war, Germany approved like new LNG terminals in a matter of days, which previously was impossible, right? So it is possible, but it just needs to go faster.
Yeah, I think coming in with the mandate, as you put it, there's a window where promise of change is warranted and leeway is there to execute. I think that the need for actual change starts to compound. That window of, okay, we know things, we got to turn the wheels, we have to steer the ship, but at a certain point, that has to actualize. And an example I realized again this week is we're still waiting on an AI strategy from the government, from councils and other things in place. And I think we're talking about one of the most obvious sets of things that need to be done, and we're over a year later waiting for a published plan, yet alone what that plan will say about what then happens in what time frame. So
totally
I think, just like when you start any job, it's not like here's all my set of responsibilities. It's where can I add value the fastest and start to build credibility and trust.
Totally.
And I think we need some of that.
Totally. And look, on day one, right, you have the right to say, I've got a plan for a plan, on day one.
Yeah.
I think 60 days in, and this is the same at a company, right? If you're a new executive at a company, you get to be in the listen and learn mode for 30 to 60 days, and then you actually do stuff, and you have to put your name on a few accomplishments. And the risk is if you don't do that, you quickly start to lose credibility. And if 6 months in you haven't really put your name on anything, more often than not, it's not going to work out. And I think that's a problem.
I think it took a lot for us to get some tailwinds. And it would be good to see that follow through.
Yes, absolutely.
Hard to create that swing of momentum as a country, yet alone as a society and culture, and we're there. So before we wrap up, I want to switch gears and actually just talk about the industry of Uber, because you're sitting at the center of a lot of interesting things. I think it'd be crazy to not ask about them. I think what everyone here is wondering most is when we're getting some self-driving Ubers in Toronto. What's the plan, man? How am I getting home today?
We need a framework for regulation. No, I mean, there are real regulatory constructs that we've got to work through. And the good thing is, I think self-driving cars are so obviously and self-evidently good for society in the long run, that I'm extremely confident that we will get there, not just in Toronto, but in every domain in Canada and globally. There are certainly vested interests that are concerned about the impacts of self-driving, what's it going to do to this labor transition that we're going to go through with AI, what about traffic, what about this, what about that. But I think there are way more good arguments than bad arguments, and so that over the medium run, the regulatory stuff will sort itself out. I think Uber is actively trying to get partners focused. So Uber's strategy on AVs is we want to be the platform for deployment, right? Anyone who wants to put autonomous vehicles on our network, whether you're an OEM or you're an L4 software provider, whether you're a fleet that owns the assets, whether you're a financier that underwrites the assets, you put those vehicles on our network, you'll get very high utilization, your return on assets will be great, and for our customers, they'll get assets or access to the best technology. So we're actively trying to encourage partners to bring their tech here. We've got you mentioned Raquel and the Wabi team that are building self-driving tech for both trucks as well as passenger vehicles right here in Toronto, which is amazing. And hopefully we can get some Wabi demos going soon, because I think that would be inspiring for folks. So soon is the answer, but I don't have a specific date.
I mean, I don't think traffic in the city could get any worse, and I've seen some of our drivers here, so I'm betting on self-driving as a better solution. You talked about the promise of AI. Dara's spoken, very, very broadly about the promise of AI and implementation and utility of that. What do you think happens to the labor market? You talked about the number of people that are driving income from Uber or depend on the network. Cast us out 5 or 10 years. What do you think the situation is in the industry?
I think Alex mentioned that the sort of industrial revolution moment, and I think just like the industrial revolution, there will be winners and losers on a very micro level, but macro, I think it will be broadly fantastic for society. And I think over time, I am a bit of a traditionalist, believing that new jobs will emerge that we can't even think of today.
Totally.
And that there will be sort of induced demand for labor because the economy will grow at a higher than baseline rate, because I think the promise and the impact of AI will be so significant. So I am optimistic. That said, I can't specifically tell you what the 10.5 million people who earn money on Uber today are going to be doing in 15 years. Because I think for some period of time, there will be more demand for gig economy workers. We are growing the pie right now. We believe that hybrid is and when I say hybrid, sort of a mix of humans and robots in our network, is going to be the solution for a number of years. And so for a number of years, I actually think the labor market on our platform will grow. But at some point in time, they will decrease, at least the types of jobs being done today. And I can't tell you where all those folks will go, but I'm an optimist, and I think history doesn't always repeat itself, but it often rhymes with itself. And I think we will see new industries emerge, and I think societal prosperity will ultimately triumph. But I can't tell you exactly how it's going to play out. And I do think governments need to be thoughtful about what the transition looks like. I don't think you can put your head in the sand and think that there won't be tense moments or tough moments. There will be, and I think we have to sort of be eyes wide open to those.
Awesome. You're at the center of some pretty cool stuff. There must be some secret things, but are there any really amazing or underrated demos you've seen in the mobility space that you could tell us about? What's out there that we're not realizing is coming faster than we think?
I think self-driving cars rightly, I think, dominate headlines in my world today. And it's because they're real. This is not a theoretical thing, right? Waymo's doing 500,000 trips a week at this point, which is significant volume. And every day there are more self-driving vehicles on the road. So the technology problem has been solved, and now it's sort of a scaling and business model problem. But AVs are real, and they're dominating the headlines. I think we are not that far out from form factors like vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. There's a number of companies that are building, effectively human-sized drones that will be much better solutions than helicopters for urban transport, for mid-range transport, that will be safer, that will be quieter, that will be environmentally more friendly, that will solve a lot of the challenges, frankly, that helicopters have, and that over time will be autonomous and will bring prices down. And this is going to feel like a Jetsons type world when we get there.
Have you been in one of these things?
I have not been in one of these. I've seen demo flights. Okay. But the demos are starting now, right? Okay. A company called Joby that Uber's an investor in did a demo flight in Manhattan a few weeks ago. And we're not that far off from that being your airport commute from here to Pearson, right? And I think that's going to have amazing knock-on effects for society. Think of the impact on real estate values. If you can live what is a 2-hour drive outside of Toronto, but commute to work in an eVTOL in 20 minutes, all of a sudden where you can live, the world just changes a lot. And I think it's going to be incredible. It's going to be safe. And people aren't thinking about that today, but I think in 20 years they'll be everywhere, and that's going to be amazing.
Love that. We've talked a bit about the alumni already. So before we wrap, I'm curious, are there founders or builders that you're watching or investing in right now that you think are going to define the long game in Canada, that are going to be part of this next decade in a big way?
If you're going to make me name names.
Name names.
Look, I think what Raquel and the Wabi team are doing is truly amazing. I think they've
largest venture round in Canadian history. I think
Yeah,
that deserves a huge round of applause for Raquel.
And like sort of quiet, right? It's not a consumer-facing company today, and so it's not necessarily a brand that I think is broadly known. But as you say, largest venture round in Canadian history, with a novel approach, right? There are dozens of self-driving companies. I think Wabi is taking a novel approach to being a simulation-first development stack, and I think potentially ends up short-circuiting the timeline to get to the finish line, and when they are successful, it will be massively impactful for the world. And I think that's really inspiring, and it's a Canadian story. And by the way, Raquel has, and I'm sure she'd be comfortable saying this, but has rebuffed so many opportunities to take her team to the US.
Right.
And is choosing to be here, became a Canadian citizen last year, and has put her roots down firmly here. And I think that's amazing.
Well, I want you to promise me when you're ready to test these vertical EVs in Toronto that you'll give me a shout. I'm willing to put on my
100%,
Captain America
100%.
helmet and
We'll go together.
get on board. Deal.
Awesome.
Thank
All
you
right,
so
thank
much
you.
for being
Thanks,
here, Andrew.
folks.
Thank you. Andrew, everyone. Thank you so much.